L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim. Tess and Yud Kislev, Chassidim found very, very difficult, because Tess Kislev was the day of the stalkus of the Mittler Rebbe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yesh v'mamale Yemeim u'shneim shel tzadikim, and Yud was the Yom HaGeula, when the Mittler Rebbe was officially released from all of the problems that he had from the different Mesirah, and he was able to continue the Avodah of Verspreiten de Chassidus Yafutzu meine Secho Chutzo. When one takes a look at the history of the Mittler Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe ran away from the war of Napoleon and eventually got on Chavdalet Teves to a little shtetl, not even a shtetl, a little hick town as we say in English. And Motzei Shabbos Kodesh La'achar Avdolah was the stalkus of the Alter Rebbe. And at that time the Mittler Rebbe was in Kremenchuk. And the nearest Beis Olam at the time was a few hundred kilometers away in Haditz. And they had to take some, how many Chassidim exactly they were, we don't know. But they had to take a sledge and go with horses, not horses, with dogs, to bring the Alter Rebbe to Haditz and to have the Kfura there. And of course, it was quite a journey in the middle of the freezing winter of Moscow, of Russia. But eventually, the Alter Rebbe got the Kfura in Haditz, took a few days. And the Mittler Rebbe, when he heard about it, began to organize that Chassidim should remain together, united. And among the many things that the Mittler Rebbe did then was, first of all, to send out letters and appeal for money for all the people who had come with the Alter Rebbe in the traveling from the time they left Ladi till the time they got to where they were. And that everybody should be able to be compensated. There should be money for people to have. The second thing the Mittler Rebbe did was to write away to all the different communities in that area in Weißrussland and to ask the different cities whether they can come and to build up a community. And the community that answered back was, of course, the city of Lubavitch, and told the Mittler Rebbe that he can come with his whole group of Chassidim and they'll give them wood to build. And from that year on, a year after the Stalkus and Tovkefai and Dalet onwards, Lubavitch became the Ira Bira of Chassidus Chabad for 105 years until the Rebbe Nishmas Seiden left in Tofrei Shayin Vov. Now, of course, when you think a moment for 1 second what the Mittler Rebbe accepted upon himself, famous letter from Moshe Meisels, what the Alter Rebbe told Moshe Meisels what's going to happen after the Stalkus. And you ask yourself the following question. Everyone learns Rambam every day, and the Rambam everyone knows, the Meir Nam Duchel Lechol Aderes, and the Rambam had a son. How many people actually know the name of the son of the Rambam, what he wrote, his Sfarim? So if you do Likut Siches, so you certainly, there's a few times that Rebbe has whole Shakel Vitaria, but most people don't know very much about him because at the end of the day he was overshadowed by his father. Tazat Taten, you have such a person, no matter how big you'll be, but at the end of the day, Pnei Meshach Pnei Chamo, Upnei Yeshua Pnei Levono. You can't compare. Take what the Alter Rebbe was, and as we know, when the Mendel Haradoker went to Eretz Yisrael, he told the Chassidim of Weißrussland that he have to take the Alter Rebbe should become the Nasi of that door. And everybody's got to follow exactly what the Alter Rebbe says, even though not many were so 100% involved. But at the end of the day, that's what the Mendel Haradoka, who the Alter Rebbe accepted the Mendel Haradoka as his Rebbe after the Istalkus of the Maggid. So the Alter Rebbe, so the Mittler Rebbe had, number one, to organize Chassidim in Lubavitch. The Mittler Rebbe had to give out money to the whole family to make sure that everybody had what to eat. And at the very same time, one of the things that the Mittler Rebbe organized and made sure would happen is the printing of Chassidus. If you actually take a look and ask yourself, what did Chassidim have after the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic? So they had the Tanya, not all the volumes also, not all the sections, and that was it. And it's not until the Mittler Rebbe printed the Siddur with Dach that they had any Chassidus they could actually learn. They may have had drushim, handwritten drushim, that one person gave to the other. But at the end of the day, because of the upheavals of the war and everything that was happening at that time, it was a very, very difficult situation from beginning to end. And the Mittler Rebbe, as he writes in a very famous Hakdama, which everybody, tomorrow, if you have time, everybody has time, there's no shaila about that. The Hakdama to Imre Bina, where the Alter Rebbe, where the Mittler Rebbe writes, why is he publishing Chassidus? And we know, because in the Teres Chaim, when they printed Teres Chaim, the Mittler Rebbe's Drushim on Breishis, so we know that they came out in pamphlets, like Likutei Sichos. And the reason they came out in pamphlets was because people couldn't afford buying a whole sefer. Buying a whole sefer cost money. And not everybody had a rich shver. And as a result of that, they gave it out in pamphlets. And one of the Maimorim that we have from these pamphlets is by Nocha Shoya Orum. And in that Maimor, you see that the Mittler Rebbe goes to town writing against Goyim. But to take a look at the Maimor as it is in Teres Chaim, a lot of what's in the single pamphlet is missing. Because in order to get published in Russia, anything had to go through the censor. And if the censor didn't like what you wrote, they wouldn't let you publish it. So you had what was written in a kuntris, and then you had the sefer. But the Mittler Rebbe writes in the Hakdama of Imre Bina that what is the whole concept of Chassidus? What did the Alter Rebbe want? What was the interest of the Alter Rebbe? So Be'emes, one of the first things the Alter Rebbe published was, of course, Hilchos Talmud Torah. And in Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Alter Rebbe writes that every person has to learn Pshat, Remesh, Drus, and Sod. You have to learn Kol HaTorah Kula. And if you don't do it the first time, they send you back a second time. Everyone knows the famous story that in Russia, you couldn't live in the big cities, you had to live in a small city, unless you had some business that the government allowed you to be in the big cities. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid, who Weistois was involved in building railroads or whatever they were doing in Russia at the time, and he was allowed to live in Moscow or in Petersburg. And as a result of that, he lived there, but the only problem was there was no chinuch for his children. And as a result of that, one of his children went off the derech and became mamish like a regular, normal Russian. Went to school, went to university. And after a few years, he became a professor and he wrote a book. And after a few years, the Alter Rebbe came to Petersburg. So the father, the chassid of the Alter Rebbe, said to his son, maybe me you don't want to listen to, because I'm not modern, I don't know all the things that you know, I don't speak the language, I don't do this, I don't do that, but my Rebbe is a boki in all Chachmas Ha'olam, knows mathematics and physics, you name it. So all shilas you have about Torah, mitzvahs, and why we do all these different things, you can ask him. So he's coming to town, and I'll make an appointment, and you go and see him. So the son was maskim. The Alter Rebbe arrives, and this Bacha, the Shingaman already, goes into Yechidus, and the Alter Rebbe asks him, what are you doing now? What's your parnosa? So he says, I just wrote a book on mathematics, which is going to be sold all over Russia, and it's going to become the most famous book on mathematics. So the Alter Rebbe said, I'd like to see it and go over it. So this guy thinks to himself, here's the Alter Rebbe. He saw the tzir of the Alter Rebbe. What does the Alter Rebbe know about mathematics and about geometry and alamaisis? He looks like one of these old fruma guys that doesn't know in these things. Benyamin Elismeilei. But the Alter Rebbe didn't take any notice, and he said to the younger man, give me the sefer, I'll look it over and come back in 2-3 days. 2 or 3 days later, this fella comes back to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe takes the book page by page and Poshet rips it apart, shows him stires and the shows gehalten, and Poshet made ash and porach and blotte from the whole book that this guy wrote about mathematics, and he showed it that every page is molish years kirimen. When the Alter Rebbe finished, this guy fainted, and the Alter Rebbe said to the shamas that we're taking him back to Ladi. Comes back to Ladi, so the Alter Rebbe says to the Mittler Rebbe that you should learn Chassidus with him, and I'll get somebody to learn Nigla with him. Und kach habe. The Mittler Rebbe learned with this guy every single day Chassidus, and another guy learned with the guy Nigla, and this guy went on for 6 months. All of a sudden, one day the Mittler Rebbe sees that his Chabrusa hasn't come in, so he went to his room, and he walks into the room, and he sees that the person's dead. Yotza nishmose be'echad. And he runs into the Alter Rebbe, and he says, Tate, look what's happened. This guy that we brought back, a young man, gestorben. So the Alter Rebbe nodded and said, make the kvura. Then afterwards, come in to me and I'll explain to you the whole story. They buried the guy, and afterwards the Mittler Rebbe went into the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe said as follows. Everybody knows the Gemara in the beginning of Adizorah, that there was a guy called Rabbi Telsner ben Durdayo. And he was one of the top-notch Balei Averas of that generation. Every Avera that you find in Chumash and Poskim, he did. But he was getting older, and he realized that he has to go upstairs. He got a din v'cheshen l'maylo. Now what is he going to answer? Says the Gemara, he turned to the mountains and he said, Bakshu alai rachmim, and he turned to the sun and the moon, and they all told him, you made the bed, you got to lie in it. Eina dover toli alabi. Then he said, the only one who can do tshuva is me. V'go b'pchi, v'yotza nishmosoi. Omar Rebbe, yesh keinei lomoy b'sho achas. The only problem was, he went upstairs, and whoever dealt with him, the Malachim that dealt with him, said, Gewaldig, tshuva was horrendous, was a mamash charote, al milas. There's only one thing, you have no capital, you have no cash, no teira, no mitzvahs, no maisim tevim, no tefillah, nothing. So where are we going to send you? You have to be nenem is eva shchina, and the nenem is eva shchina, you have to have what to show for it. And he had nothing, because all his life is indik. Take a tshuva geton, so I'm not going to send him to Gehenim. What is going to happen to the guy? So they sent him down again. And the second time, the same exact thing happened. And they did it a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. Said the Alter Rebbe, when I saw him, I saw the daughter is the neshama of Rabbi Telsner ben Durdayo, and I was machlit in myself that I'm not going to let him go. I'm going to schlep him out of Imkia Klippis, and she'll be able to go to Milo with Torah, mitzvahs, and everything else. That's why the reason I brought him back. And now that we fixed up his tikkun, that he has Torah, mitzvahs, and maisim tevid, he can go back upstairs, and they can do whatever he wants. So when the Rebbe told over his stories, the Rebbe said, Ozetman with the Alter Rebbe gedaiget, even for the neshamas that are not around now. This Eliezer ben Daya was his man Mishnah maybe. And the Alter Rebbe is much thousands of years later, Nafa Pikain, but Alter Rebbe given Kedai to do everything the Alter Rebbe did in order to save this neshama. Now we know that the Mittler Rebbe in the Akdom, as I mentioned before, Timrei Bina, talks about one thing. He says, Lepoyel Mamish, even though the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch says clear that the reason why you have to learn Chassidus is because it's part of Torah, Pshat, Remesh, Drush, and Sod. But that's not the only reason. It's not just you have to learn because it's a chokhmah. I once heard from Rabbi Yoel a story with Rebbe Marash that there was a big Litvak who was given a great Talmid Chochem. Not only in Nigla, but in Kabbalah, Yadin and Allah Kisvar, Rizal, everything. He knew everything. And he came to Lubavitch and he went into the Rebbe Marash and he told to the Rebbe Marash, what am I missing? What don't I have? So he told the Rebbe Marash, I don't have Chassidus. And I would like to, it should be part of my, what I know. So the Rebbe Marash told him, Chassidus lernt me nicht, that you should become, you have another PhD, or you have another smicha, another piece of paper that says you know Chassidus. Chassidus means that something's got to happen to you when you learn Chassidus. And therefore, the Mittler Rebbe Marash said, it's not the way to learn Chassidus. But in the Akdomas, the Mittler Rebbe writes that the whole Tachlis HaKavonah is that a person should realize of Achdus Hashem. And those of you who had the schus of going to Haditz, where the Alter Rebbe is buried, one of the nice things you see there is the Pareiches in the shul. And on the Pareiches, it's actually written that the whole Tachlis that the Alter Rebbe was Mesa Nefesh and came down and taught Chassidus and sat in Tfisa was to instill in every single one of us the Hashrot Mimashrish Menas, the union of Achdus Havaya, V'adai Tayoim V'ashay Beisel V'avecha, and Krish Me'echot, Memali Kol Almen, Sevev Kol Almen. And as we know the Taich and V'yodaito Hayoim, why does the Pasuk say V'yodaito Hayoim? So the story goes, there were three Chassidim who were talking. Like today, when people are talking, so of course nobody can hear what's being said. V'yodaito Hayoim, that don't leave it till tomorrow. Chassidus is for today. You have to learn Chassidus now. When the Rebbe Rashab starting Tepchet Mimim, so the elder Chassidim, the Tzemach Chassidim, could not understand to take young boys of 16, 17 and to learn with them Chassidus. And the Rebbe Rashab, as we see today, that was, as Rabbi Golem said before, that was in the Keser HaMelech, to put the drops into every single individual in order to be able to milchem Mechemes Havaya and to be able to go out into the world of communism and eventually then come to America and to change the whole world. And without Chassidus, this would not have happened. There's no question today, even Misnagdim, Amoida, Lepoil, that without Chassidus, there's nothing to talk about people. The Inyan of Emunah, the Inyan of Lekabel of Oil Malchus Shamayim, and the Bittul Telekus would not be around. It is only today that the Rabbeim were made for Chassidus into the world, and the Rebbe particularly, in every language, in every corner of the globe, every place, that everybody has to learn Chassidus in order to realize it has to be done with your heart, and it has to be done with your brain. A person was given the greatest gift of Seichel. Chochma Bina Das is the greatest gift a person has. So why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu give it La'am Kroivoi? Because we have to somehow, with our minds, with our hearts, understand as Ein Noid Milvadoi Kipshutoi, as the Tzemach Tzedek says in Derech V'Sechel, when it says Molech Al Oretz Kveidoi Ve'ein Mikro Yotzei B'nei Pshutoi, and we have to be the ones who have to realize that the Kol HaTeira Kula, says the Mittler Rebbe there, is based on this understanding as Ein Noid Milvadoi. And as a result of that, the bittul that every person has to realize that his tachas hakavona to come down into this world is to get into his mind and in his heart the understanding that ein noid milvadei kipshutoi, and that's the yesod of Torah mitzvahs. And that's why he says the Mittler Rebbe after Aseres HaDibros you have Shema, because the ganze reading of Shema is the yesod of Kol HaTorah Kula. And as a result of that, the Mittler Rebbe printed Chassidus galore. For Yontiv, you have for Chanukah Shariyeda, for Rosh Hashanah you have Ateres Reish, for you have Apodaber Shoda Nafshevitis Kislev, the whole Sefer, with Shari Emunah, and then you have Shari Yichud, all the different Maimori Chassidus which the Mittler Rebbe published B'Yomov, and Mittler Rebbe wrote without stop. If you take a look at Sefer Chassidus, that when the Mittler Rebbe wrote, there were lines of 90 lines on a piece of paper. When the top line was still wet, he finished the bottom line. And it was Nashbos Hakul Mischas V'Sholem. But the Mittler Rebbe wanted that every person, he wrote Sfarim for every person. Emre Binas for Kisir Lepler, The Rebbe wrote Sfarim, the Mittler Rebbe, for every single individual, in order that that person should find what he has to learn. And then the Mittler Rebbe says, you can come along and say, who am I? Ich bin a Gornish mit Gornish. Once you can't take a Zayin, bist a Gornish mit Gornish, no question about it. Plenty of people are Gornish mit Gornish. And if a person wants to, he can. And everyone knows the story about the Lezer the Krumme, that once in Yerushalayim, when after the Alter Rebbe started Kol Chabad, so the Alter Rebbe sent money to Eretz Yisrael. That's one of the reasons that the Russian government arrested the Alter Rebbe, because he's sending money to the enemy, which was Turkey, was at war with Russia at the time. And as a result of that, so the Alter Rebbe sent shluchim with the money to bring to Eretz Yisrael. And one time the shliach came, and he chazed a maimer in one of the shuls. When he chazed the maimer in one of the shuls, so there was a guy sitting there, and as we say in modern day English, he freaked out. The mamish heard the maimer, he didn't know what hit him. So he asked the guy, where did you hear that? So he said, in Ladi, in Lioshna, I'm Alten Rebbe. So this guy, I won't say he's an extremist like some of the Bochum here, but he was a Chassidish guy, took his talis and tefillin, and he goes to the boat in Haifa to take a boat to go to Russia. And he falls down and he breaks his foot, which was a simon ma'ila that you don't go, you got to ask your wife, you got to say goodbye, leave her a credit card, do something, etc., etc. And he didn't give two hoots, and he gets on the boat, and he goes to the Alter Rebbe and becomes one of the big chassidim by the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe eventually found out about it and told him he should send his wife a get. But you see there, the man heard one maimer, and the guy had never heard a maimer in his life. And that turned him on to such an extent that he was muchen lech lechem yartzchem iladchem beisavicha to pick him up and go to the Alter Rebbe. But it's a do emes leifens zum emes, it's a do fire leifens zum fire. And that's what the Mittler Rebbe wanted every person, not to come along with a shifle shel sheker. I can't do this, I can't daven, I can't learn. We all have excuses. Esav also had excuses. This week, Sedra, Esav is fighting, and had Tainet mit Megagamen de Broches. And Yaakov had no reason to do that. And he wants to fight him. Arbame is Shimei. He's not interested. Yaakov Amaisa de Ishtom doesn't bother him in the least. And Lepoyel, Yaakov has to fight. Not only Lamata, Sar Shalesh of Yaakov has to fight. He's got to fight the guy from upstairs. And Itake Vayiga B'chaf Yerech Yaakov, and as a result of that, it does have an impact. Whenever you fight with your Yetzer Hara, Hamisnavel Imenuvel, what happens to you? So what the Mittler Rebbe wants of every single person was the Chedesh Kislev. Chedesh Kislev with the Iker Edach, Yutas Kislev, Yudalet Kislev. And we know that Chanukah, what's the whole luftu of Chanukah? The whole luftu of Chanukah, Sheyechoisam Shemen Chosam B'chaysamay Shel Koyen Godel. That you can learn a lot of other things. But if it's not Chosam B'chaysamay Shel Koyen Godel, if there's something missing with the Tara, and even though Tara to Mahutra B'tzibur, all that lumdus that you can say, Chassidus not learning from our Rebbe, and Chassidus not kochen from learning, and the Chassidus has to be brought down in Midrash Belev, and to have a Poshna Bitla Telikus, total bitl, without any question whatsoever, whatever the Rebbe wants. As Alter Rebbe writes, Inol is Tavino Lachte Veitzim. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have told us that we should clap holz, we'll do the same thing. So on such a day of Tes and Yud Kislev, was the Mittler Rebbe wanted, and not only that, as everybody knows, that the Mittler Rebbe had 7 daughters, and later they found the matzeva of an 8th daughter. It was Hasten Dveira Miriam, a kappa matzeva. I remember seeing it in the Lubavitch, a little small matzeva. She was 12 years old when she passed away. And the Mittler Rebbe also had a daughter called Menucha Rachel, who picked us, they was told by the Mittler Rebbe to go to Eretz Yisrael. And in the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, she picked herself up with the whole family, and she went to Eretz Yisrael to Hebron and built up the Yeshiva Chabadi, which Ada Yom Hazen, the Rebbe owned property in Hebron, the Rebbe took star gekocht in Hebron. And the Mittler Rebbe, the people that were there, Vetemot Bear and all the Chassidim, said they're going to go to Eretz Yisrael, they won't hear Chassidus from the Rebbe. So the Rebbe promised them that he'll send them copies of all the Maimorim. That means the Rebbe didn't say, just because you're living in Eretz Yisrael and just because there's no WhatsApp, And just because there's no emails, etc., you don't have to learn Chassidus. But I've learned Chassidus wherever you are. And you can be in the holiest place in heaven, and it's a soul, makes no difference. I will send you my morim, and with these my morim, you could be able to have in your head and in your heart, she'ein oid milvadoi kipshutoi, and le'osid lovei. The Mittler Rebbe in that Akdoma says something phenomenal, that le'osid lovei, when there'll be v'ro kol bosa yachlav, at the fleischige Eden, that with our physical eyes we'll be able to see ein oid milvadoi. Soll der Eibster helfen, the schus from the Balei Magula, and schus from all those who are meifetz chassidus b'chol oilam kuloi. We should be Zoicha sein, so sind sich mit den Reben beguf Gashmi, mekabel sein Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu, Bina Beis HaMikdash, Mamash.